Hey there, my name is Austin. I'm a product designer at GitLab. I work in the manage stage on the compliance group. Today what I wanted to share was the insights that we got from conducting solution validation, which is one of our stages in our validation track for validating the ideas that we have that we're getting ready to move into our build track, which is where we start actually building the things that we've come up with. And so this is an effort that started in the fall, progressed through the end of 2020, and now we'll be starting to plan the work. What I want to start with is where we're coming from. So we released a feature called the Compliance Dashboard back in 12.8. We recently finished 13.8. So that milestone's been quite some time. And so since this feature has been out in the wild for a bit, we've had some feedback from customers, and now we've conducted a little bit of research to better understand the solution as it stands today, as well as some proposed ideas that we're bringing in. And our hope in doing all of this is that we're going to continue to improve our direction on compliance management. We want to continue to provide Cameron, who is our main persona, the ability to better perform their job in managing their compliance aspects of their projects and their organizations. So then what were we trying to achieve? So we had this idea, we wanted to continue to supplement the compliance dashboard, and that we wanted to introduce more insights into it. And so today you can assume there are a few things that you can learn, and those are identified by these green checkbox. You can figure out who made the change, who did some of the peer review, what were some of the tests that passed. And so how that looks today in the compliance dashboard is you can see a merge request, you can see who created it, what project it was a part of, the merge number, the people that approved it, its branch, its path, when it was merged. And this was a really great MVC for getting it out there and getting some initial feedback. It kind of highlights some of the most important aspects of the merge request, but from a compliance perspective. So there are certain aspects that you'd want to look into depending on the regulations you might need to abide by, or just for general best practices. For a great example of that, one that people would commonly use is like you don't want the author to be the person that approves their own merge request. So showing that there's some separation of duties is always a good thing. So what do we do? Initially, we went out and we researched some jobs to be done. So we're trying to define what does Cameron have to do in their job to hire their software for, and we want GitLab to help solve those jobs. And so if we look at this job, like we want to enable Cameron to manage the compliance controls of applications, meet their policies so they can avoid problems when they come to an audit. And there's some more tasks that go associated with that. It's not just getting ready for audits. There's a lot more things that go in there. But generally speaking, that's the direction that they're trying to be prepared for. So over time, we evolved this idea to where we thought like we had a pretty good idea of what we wanted to build. And what I love about this is a great example of like we didn't necessarily think, or at least I didn't think as a designer, the right solution first. And we definitely learned that through some of our iteration process. So now I'm going to walk you through a little bit of the designs that we mocked up and where we got to before we started to do some of the testing. So again, this is what the existing dashboard looks like. Some of our initial ideas were like exposing the different environments in which merge requests are released to. So maybe you have a production environment, a staging, a canary, different places that you progress through a system. So this is a way you could tab out that data. We also are only showing the most recent merge request, which we highlight here, but no one ever catches that. They just assume like there's only 2 merge requests that have problems here. In reality, it's kind of hiding ones that are older. It's only showing you the most recent one. So that's problem number 1 that needs to be resolved. So with that, we're trying to expose more merge request data, trying to show more rich information around it, and trying to create this insights drawer where you go dig and find out all the different details. And so everybody is really excited about that from our side, so we continue to run with it, refine it some more. And you'll notice that I'm playing more with high fidelity data as opposed to like low fidelity mockups. And that's partly because what we're most concerned about is how are we going to present this data in a way that makes sense. So breaking it down to like lower mocks where we assume information would be landing was a little bit harder to envision what that would actually look like, because we relied pretty heavily on very synthesized view of components like an icon and a badge to relay a lot of information. So this helped us quickly validate or invalidate some of those ideas. Again, we kept adding to this drawer and it became like quite large. Something that I heard from a few users, they didn't scroll, they didn't know they needed to. So that was pretty insightful. I think sometimes users forget that they can scroll or they don't know they can. And so some of this data that was below the line, like they wouldn't necessarily know to scroll down and find it. But we'll talk more about the insights that we learned in a moment. But this was essentially the prototype that we were bringing in, what we were trying to ask the different participants to do in some moderated research sessions was to perform a few tasks. And essentially we were trying to say, hey, you're interested in this merge request called fix GitLab Ruby not starting a test. Tell me about it. What compliance related problems do you see with it? And so they did what I would have expected them to, like they clicked on it, they reviewed the data, but it was really hard for them to discern what were the flags that were being created. What do they need to give their attention to? All this was summarized in a little report here that I put together. So we talked about people that we participated in a moderated research session. We had about 6 people. One we didn't include in the findings just because they really weren't a good fit for the study overall. But based on this research, it really gave us the emphasis that we are moving in the right direction, but we need to make a little bit of a change in order to be moving in the right direction for sure. Some pretty interesting insights that I found where everybody said we have to change the fact that we were only showing one merge request. They need to see more than that, and they really want to see exactly what the problems are with those merge requests. So today, if you're looking at that compliance dashboard, you'll see that we'll tell you, you have one rule that's not adhering to the separation of duties, which you're like, okay, what does that mean? Well, then you'd have to go dig into your docs. So you go look at the compliance dashboard, and we break down what this means. So we tell you, okay, one of the rules is not following, so somebody is violating one of these 3 rules. But then you're going to have to go dig into the merge request and figure out which one they violated. So that's an insight we definitely want to take action on. Additionally, a lot of the participants are emphasizing the importance to filter since we expose this feature at the group level. So this is at a group, not a project. There can be organizations that have hundreds, if not thousands of projects living within a group. You can imagine if we're not just showing the most recent merge requests, if we're just showing all of the ones that are flagged, this could get pretty heavy pretty quickly. So we want to be able to give users the way to filter down information and be able to find what's most important to them. Now, jumping back over to the report, the other thing we saw was, yes, the participants were going to find information in the merge request, but they didn't understand what was most important. Everybody was emphasizing, I want to know what is most important next. They want to be able to see a priority of what they needed to go take action on. So what we did was document the different changes that we wanted to introduce into the UI, and also documented a few things that we thought would be really great for future considerations. Like I mentioned initially, we had all these ideas for what we wanted to introduce in terms of insights, but what we really kind of discovered was, yes, those are some really great insights that we want to add in. Like one we're going to be putting in will be the ability to understand like how did this affect the code quality. We think that's a pretty easy one that we can pull from just given the current state of our API. But some of these other ones will be a bit more challenging, and so we're going to consider them out of scope. What's really great about this epic here is I broke down all the different work that went into it, so you can see over time how this idea progressed. So, I mean, it's like back in October, right after we finished the jobs to be done research, we started redefining how we wanted to shape the experience for the compliance dashboard. We were talking about it in the language of becoming more of a change management item to show a history of data. And you'll notice that now I'm using the language compliance report to define the feature itself, because something we were hearing repeatedly from users is what we're showing isn't really a dashboard. You're not seeing trends of data, and they all talked about how it would be super insightful to see over time the amount of separation of duties or segregation of duties going up or down, having those violations being flagged. but we're not presenting that data. We're presenting it in much more of a historical list view, and so that's another component we're going to take into account when we think about redesigning the dashboard itself. And the biggest thing that I wanted to emphasize with the compliance dashboard is like, what are the violations and how can we make them better? So we'll jump back into the designs here and walk through a few more ideas that we had. So initially I was like, all right, let's summarize them. Let's say each of these have a badge next to them showing a counter. This will tell you how many violations each one has. Then you can open this drawer and it'll tell you more information about those violations, and we'll only show the violations. We won't show any of the things that were okay, that passed. But I didn't really love this idea because I didn't feel like the badge was really calling out that it was a violation. So then I was like, all right, well, what if we specified like a level of severity? And I was really trying to keep like the current data that we had in the existing dashboard and just reshuffling some things around. And again, still tucking those violations into the drawer, which I think made it a little bit more clear. It definitely synthesized the table down a bit, but it still wasn't obvious exactly from just looking at the report what the individual problems were. You had to go into that drawer and then you kind of had to decipher what you needed to take action on from there. And so then I had this other idea of like, well, what if we just did the exact opposite? We brought all the violations into the main report, broke them down by merge request. So this merge request shows up multiple times, but it has individualized violations. So there's a violations for a merge request being approved by an author, and there's also a violation for it being approved by its committers. And so that's great because now we're individualizing some of the results. So this is the idea that we're ultimately trying to run with. And what I did was then pull this back into the team after we refined some of the designs, got some feedback from other designers, got some input from front-end dev, and from their fresh take, they'll be able to give some very great opinions on some things that made sense and some things that didn't. A few things that stood out were the details button. They weren't really clear if that was related to the violation or if it was related to the merge request, or they also weren't super clear on what this little alert meant, which I thought was totally valid. It's not exactly obvious. So took that out, changed the button, and now we have a much more reasonably scoped vision for what we want to do, and we have validated that this is going to be an improvement with our users. Something that we documented in our report here was that, let's see if I can find exactly where I referenced it, but everybody said that this change that we were proposing was much more useful compared to what we have in the current compliance dashboard. Now, I feel like it's a little bit easy to meet that goal because we were only showing the most recent merge request, and that was probably the biggest pain point. And so I took that design that I was showing you here. Well, this is more of the interactive prototype of how it would show up, but took this report and I started to scope it into an epic that I broke down to a number of issues. So now we have this big parent epic. It's tied to compliance management. It's specifically going to convert the compliance dashboard into an insightful report. And I did my best job that I could to break it down to what I thought would make sense in terms of implementation of the different features that we would need. Our product manager's out right now, and so I was just trying to help break down my ideas into the way that they make sense in my head. I probably don't have a really great sense of how this actually breaks down across front end and back end, but my intent was to try and break it up into chunks that we could deliver incrementally and fully release this feature as we develop each component. Now, I'm really excited about this feature because I think it's going to make a big difference for its usage. So something I would love to see out of this is a spike in our number of views on the compliance report and try and start tracking retention rate week to week. I believe right now it's quite low, and so my hope is that we'll see more users using it, that we can advocate for its usage more, because now that we're actually giving some sort of opinion on what we feel the severity of different violations are and putting them into a granular view, we'll be able to better help Cameron, going back to that original job, understand if they're meeting the requirements of their policies. Now, our definition of what is a high severity item might not matter to Cameron. We need to figure that out. But this will at least give them a starting point to go start chasing down some things that might become a problem later on. We feel like things like maybe code drops, below 1%, probably not a big deal on code coverage, or maybe pipelines that pass with a warning, that's just informational. But we see things as having not enough approvers or having a poor separation of duties as a very high severity, something that you definitely want to go resolve. For the future, I'm interested in finding out, how does Cameron want to interact with these components of data? Do they want to mark them as resolved? Do they want to pin them? Do they want to be able to create a specific report that they can then export out to other people? Currently, they have an ability to get some of the merge commits, but we know we'll need to probably evolve that in the future. But overall, I just wanted to show the progression of where we came from and how we evolved. Again, this kind of started back in October, and you can kind of see how every week or two we had some little milestone along the way of what we were doing together. We spent a good bit of time shaping up the research and then ultimately bringing together this idea that we're going to scope down and plan to prioritize in a future milestone. So be on the lookout for some good changes coming to the compliance area.